Story 1. Three upperclassmen drank Ipecac shortly before getting into the lunch line. Their plan was to time it so that once they got to the lunch ladies, they'd start violently throwing up all over the food. They were hoping their vomit would trigger a chain reaction of other students throwing up. This idea came from an episode of Family Guy that had just aired. Their plan sort of succeeded. I was already at my lunch table when it happened. I heard screaming from the food service area and saw kids running out. Apparently, only one of them managed to puke on the food. Another threw up all over the lunch trays stacked on a cart. The third guy took longer, suffering severe stomach pain before finally vomiting on the floor of the food service area. My mom, who was a teacher, told me that he's the one who told the principal what they had done, and that he later vomited all over the bed in the nurse's office. As for the chain reaction, two other students threw up during the initial chaos. So, it kind of worked. Story 2. The principal found some substance in the boys' bathroom. He called an assembly and told us we had to vote for who we thought it was. I think the principal's son got about 98% of the votes. Suddenly, the voting system wasn't valid anymore. We didn't even coordinate it. Everyone just had the same idea at once. It was glorious. Story 3. One time, a group of kids skipped class to use substances in the bathroom. Things escalated until one kid took his own poop, cupped it in his hand like a bowling ball, and slid it down the hallway, leaving a massive streak. Another kid ran alongside it, laughing. It wasn't just regular poop, it was semi-solid, mushy diarrhea. That half of the school smelled horrible for days. Story 4. A couple of kids stole potassium from the chemistry classroom. The next day, the school searched every student's backpack trying to find it. Eventually, those kids tried putting the potassium into a lake in one of their backyards. Potassium reacts explosively with water, and one of them ended up with serious burns. They started a small fire and ended up getting sued for the damage. The story grew over time until people started saying they blew up a lake. Story 5. We had what people called a race war at school. A group of mostly Arabic students made fun of a group of mostly African students, including using racial slurs. In response, about 50 students got into a huge fight on the school's wheelchair ramp. We had 3 assemblies afterward and had to fill out surveys on racial discrimination. Story 6. There was a goth kid who would always read a book alone at lunch. He was a huge guy, built like a tank. A scrawny freshman picked on him because he never reacted. One day, the freshman poured food onto his book. The goth calmly stood up, grabbed the freshman by the back, and slammed him so hard into the table that it shattered. The teacher came over and the goth cracked his neck, said he was going for a walk, and left. The freshman ended up with a broken collarbone and a bunch of busted teeth. No one messed with the goth again. Story 7. In high school, I did the morning announcements every Friday with 2 other guys in front of a green screen. We could control every TV in the school, and we were given a lot of freedom back in the early 2000s. One year before the holidays, we were told not to do anything Christmas-related because not everyone celebrates it. On the last announcement before the break, we put on Christmas costumes, had a sleigh ride video as the background, and yelled "Merry Christmas" as loud as we could. The superintendent happened to be in the building that day and freaked out. We were almost suspended. After a petition from the students, we were allowed to return but told to keep things neutral and stop making jokes. So, we went forward with a different plan. On our first day back, we kept the green screen blank and wore plain white t-shirts. We read the announcements with occasional drawn-out moans like, "Today for lunch, the school is serving Moan pizza." By the end, it sounded like something very inappropriate was happening. Then, pretending the announcements were over, we stood up in our boxer shorts and walked off camera. 10 seconds later, our friend Scott stood up from under the desk, wiped his mouth, swallowed, and walked away. That time, we were actually suspended. Story 8. In my high school chemistry class, my football coach, who also taught chemistry, was showing us how raw sodium reacts with water. Normally, a tiny sliver floats on the surface and fizzes. We convinced him to use a much bigger chunk. It sank to the bottom, and the reaction was much more dangerous. The beaker exploded, sending shards of hot glass around the room, and the ceiling tile even caught fire before the sprinklers put it out. Several students went to the hospital with minor burns and cuts. The teacher never taught chemistry again. He switched to biology. Story 9. Near graduation, a guy who was known for being strange was caught in the parking lot doing something inappropriate. 2 female students saw him and he yelled, "Hey ladies, I could use some help over here." They reported him immediately and he was arrested. Story 10. After I graduated, one of my favorite former teachers developed a serious substance addiction. On one of his binges, he walked around his house with a gun, posting things like, "Forget the police" on his public social media. People called the cops and it turned into a 6-hour standoff. He barricaded himself inside his house and eventually lost his job. Story 11. One kid sold some substances to another but wasn't paid in full. A week later, the seller arranged to meet and collect the money. The buyer showed up with a plastic pistol for protection and was relentlessly mocked for the rest of high school by both students and teachers. Story 12. There was a student nicknamed the Ghost who stole all sorts of things: a keyboard from the computer lab, a teacher's favorite coffee mug, an entire bookshelf, and all the food from the teacher's lounge. He was never caught. Another group of kids did something risky every year. Freshman year, spent the night at school by hiding in the ceiling until after dark. Sophomore year, painted something inappropriate on the football field before homecoming. Junior year, started a fight club in the woods with gloves and headgear. Senior year, cooked s'mores on the school roof on New Year's Eve. Their antics became legendary. Story 13. A football player named Parham got in trouble and wasn't allowed to walk at graduation. One day, a friend pulled up to the cafeteria in a truck during lunch, jumped out wearing only a Spider-Man mask with "Free Parham" painted on his bare butt, and ran through the cafeteria. Despite slipping on food and falling, he managed to escape. Eventually, Parham was allowed to walk at graduation. Story 14. I went to a private school where phones were banned. One day, the vice principal burst into a classroom in a panic and said, "Quick, I need to use someone's phone." 10 students handed theirs over and immediately got detention and had their phones confiscated. Story 15. A kid I knew brought a bottle of Da Bomb hot sauce to school. It's 1.5 million Scoville units and way too hot for casual eating. He let about 30 kids try it at lunch, and many ended up vomiting from the heat and panic. Some had to go to the nurse and be sent home. The principal came over the intercom and said, "Whoever brought the hot sauce, please just stop." My friend got in serious trouble. Story 16. This happened in grade school. A moose escaped from a local zoo and somehow wandered into our schoolyard during recess. We were all rushed inside and the school went into lockdown until the moose left. One guess what country I'm from. Story 17. We were called to an emergency assembly and told that a student had died. Her friends were distraught, and even students who didn't know her went silent. Some people even put together a memorial card. The whole morning felt heavy, until the dead girl arrived at school, completely unaware of what was going on. Story 18. I was a teacher, and one of the best kids I ever knew was pushed too far by a bully teacher who had been picking on him for years. One day, the teacher said something, and the student ran out to his car, grabbed a crowbar, and came back smashing glass and furniture. He tried to get to the teacher, but got trapped in the library. I was in the room next door keeping my students in their seats during the chaos. Cops from all directions showed up. State police, canine units, everyone. The student's mom eventually arrived and disarmed him. He was taken away on a stretcher. He ended up banned from school for life and got a restraining order against the teacher. Later, he was diagnosed with intermittent explosive disorder, but he went on to be a good adult. Story 19. The principal found some substance in the boys' bathroom and called an assembly, telling us to vote on who we thought was responsible. About 98% of the votes went to the principal's son. Suddenly, the voting was no longer valid. We hadn't even coordinated, it just happened naturally. Story 20. We had a fight club that made the front page of the news when someone added a newspaper reporter to our private Facebook group. The police showed up to the next fight, everyone ran, and one kid was hit by a bus crossing the street. That incident ended with a new crossing light being installed in the middle of the block. Story 21. When I was in elementary school, our classroom was in a temporary building next to the main school. One day, a homeless man burst in with a fish in his mouth. Everyone froze before scattering, and the teacher somehow got him out. Another time during class, a teacher told a student to open her desk after hearing noises coming from it. Inside was a pigeon, in a bag. We never figured out how she managed to catch it on her way to school. Story 22. During lunch, if you picked up trash and turned it into the yard attendant, you'd get a dime per piece. One kid did this every single day and was bullied for it. Kids would knock the trash out of his hands, push him over, and call him names. In junior year, he bought himself a 1966 Mustang. I still respect that kid. Story 23. A kid in the year above me decided during computer class that he needed to use the bathroom. The teacher wouldn't let him go, so he went to the back of the room and pooped in an empty Pringles can. He then went around offering Pringles to people. One kid reached in without looking and grabbed a handful. Furious, he threw it back, and soon poop was being flung all over the room. The smell lingered even after an industrial cleaning. Story 24. During my senior year, the biggest fight of my school career broke out during a class change. The hallway was packed with screaming students chanting, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" The principal eventually called the police. When officers pushed through the crowd, they found 2 students sitting on the floor, playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots. It was one of the best senior pranks ever, funny and harmless. Story 25. A kid in my class decided to skateboard down the main hallway during passing period. He hit a wet spot on the floor, lost control, and slammed straight into a vending machine. The glass didn't break, but the entire thing tipped forward and almost crushed him. Security banned skateboards from school after that. Story 26. One year during Spirit Week, a group of seniors decided to prank the principal by filling his office with balloons. They managed to get the key from a friendly staff member and spent hours blowing up hundreds of balloons. When the principal walked in the next morning, he just sighed, walked to his desk, and sat down, without popping a single balloon. By the end of the day, all the balloons were gone, and no one knows how he managed to get rid of them so quietly. Story 27. A student in our class thought it would be funny to put a stink bomb in the air vent. The entire floor smelled terrible within minutes, and classes had to be evacuated. The smell lasted for days, and the janitors were furious. Story 28. During an assembly, one kid smuggled in a remote for the projector. Every time the speaker tried to play their slideshow, the kid would turn it off or change the slides. Eventually, the speaker gave up, thinking the system was broken. The prankster was never caught. Story 29. One Halloween, a senior dressed in a giant inflatable dinosaur costume and started chasing freshmen through the halls. At first, staff tried to stop him, but when they saw how much fun everyone was having, they just let him continue until lunch. Story 30. Someone in my class replaced all the bathroom soap dispensers with mayonnaise. People were furious when they tried to wash their hands. It took the school a week to replace them all. Story 31. During the winter, a group of kids brought snowballs inside and started a full-on snowball fight in the main hallway. By the time staff stopped it, the floors were soaked, and multiple kids had slipped and fallen. Story 32. A kid in my science class brought dry ice to school and put it into one of the toilets. It made a smoky fog that filled the entire bathroom and drifted into the hallway. The administration had to shut down that part of the building until the fog cleared.